and thanks for tuning in to this Practice Meagher Masterclass on M&A. This is another masterclass from our busy autumn masterclass season. We've got a great panel today and a lot to get through, so we hope you enjoy this masterclass and get involved in the conversation. So we always start a practice area masterclass with a learning outcome. So by the end of this masterclass, you should know how to break into this practice area, know what the work of an M&A solicitor involves, and know the key issues facing the practice area right now. And before we get going, I'm just going to quickly go over some key bits. So firstly, please use the online question tool to post any questions that you have, and I'll be posing them to our speakers at the end. I'll also try to keep an eye on if any relevant one comes up during the conversation as well. And please also use the tool to let us know if you have any audio/visual problems during the masterclass, and we'll do our best to help you. Please note the masterclass is recorded, and the recording of the session will be sent to all registrants in a follow-up email tomorrow, and will be available on our YouTube channel very shortly as well. And please feel free to post about the masterclass on social media and tag us. We always see attendees posting on LinkedIn about their experience and what they learn, which is always great to see for us from the LCN team, but also for the panelists and the fans themselves. And also, we have some fantastic masterclasses coming up over the rest of the term, so please check out the LawCareers.net events page for all masterclasses. They'll be running this term. Our next one is on the 30th of October, and it's all about building your commercial awareness, so make sure you register for that. And speaking of the 30th of October, I want to remind you all that applications for our exclusive legal careers conferences, LawCareers.net Live, are open until the 30th of October. So you've still got a week to apply. So for anyone that doesn't know yet, the events are targeted for aspiring solicitors and jam-packed with law firm networking, partner and training panels, interactive workshops, and lots more. And yeah, I cannot recommend it enough for everyone who's interested in commercial law and the solicitor path. I'll be sending out a link a bit later where you can find out more and apply. So, okay, with this out of the way, I'm just going to start by asking all the attendees to answer the question on the screen, so our panelists can get an idea of who's joining us today. So there'll be a poll on your screen right now. So what stage are you at? So just submit your answer. Seems like we got around 50% postgraduate from the vote so far, which is quite interesting. And a mixed bag of second year, third year non-law students. Great, thank you for that. Just going to share these results, and I would like to run one more poll, which is about how much you know already about M&A. Seems like majority of you are saying a little, and a good amount of you are saying absolutely nothing, so not a lot. But yeah, for those that know a little or nothing, this is good because this is what the session is all about. So we hope that the session is going to be useful. Okay. Perfect. And yeah, with the polls out of the way, I would like to start with a short intro from each of the panelists. So a name, position, what firm you're from, and maybe a quick overview of your career path and how you came to be practicing in this area of law, if you wish. I'm just going to start off with how people are on my screen. So Dom, if I could start with you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to meet everyone. My name is Dominic Brown. I'm a corporate associate at Jones Day. I have been here for 6 years, so 2 years as a trainee and then 4 years PQE, and kind of always luckily done it from day one of my training contract, and have managed to get a broad experience of public and private M&A and pretty general corporate kind of work. So yeah, hopefully can touch on a few interesting things for you today. But third year doing this seminar now, which is great.
Thanks, Dom. We'd love to have you back. And Sophie.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Sophie. I am an associate at Skadden in the general corporate team. I do a variety of, a mix of public, private, and a little bit of PE work. I am 5.5 years qualified, and I trained at a UK law firm and moved across to Skadden about 4 years ago.
Perfect, thank you. And Katie?
Hi everyone, my name's Katie. I'm a corporate associate in the White & Case M&A team. I originally actually trained in Ireland, and I moved over to the UK about 3 years ago. And yeah, I mostly focus on public works, a lot of public takeovers, but I also do private.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. And last but not least, Jack.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack Gray. I'm a corporate lawyer here at Weil Gotshal. I trained way back when in 2013 at Slaughter May and qualified at Slaughter May 2015. Moved to Weil in 2020 to help kind of build out the M&A practice, and I probably spent most of my time doing M&A alongside some of our private equity work.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for this great introduction. And speaking of introductions, I think we can go ahead and get started and sort of discuss what does M&A mean. Tom, if you could help with that.
Yeah, so we'll need to get the simple one first up, but I think M&A, as I'm sure many of you will know, and you know, if not everyone, is that, I mean, literally stands for mergers and acquisitions, which is a slight misnomer given the way in which kind of it works in the UK, and actually under UK law you can't do a merger anymore. So mainly what we do is disposals or acquisitions. So either you're buying a company for your client or you're selling a company for your client. But then there's a whole heap of stuff in between that comprises it. I don't want to take away from the next question, but yeah, it's not just as simple as buying and selling a company. There's a variety of other things in between, whether it's ongoing corporate advice, challenging scenarios that involve different areas of law, joint ventures, all that sorts of stuff comes into the remit of what we do. So it's not as simple as M&A in that sense, but yeah, brings a lot of us to the table in different ways.
Perfect. Thank you, Dom. And Jack, getting a bit more specific, what are the different types of M&A transactions?
I totally agree with Dom. You know, you sort of say you're an M&A lawyer and people roll their eyes and go, what does that mean? And it means quite a broad thing, I think. So starting with, I suppose, sort of private M&A, what does that mean? That's just acquiring shares in a company that is privately held. So, you know, it might be a founder-led business, needs some capital, you know, investors coming in to help grow it. You know, they might take some shares in it, they might take all of it, and that company is privately held. And so that's what we mean by private M&A. I suppose the contrast to that is public M&A, and that's where companies are listed on a stock exchange, you know, be it the LSE or whatever. And so when we talk about public M&A or takeovers or P2P transactions, what we're talking about is control transactions of companies listed on a stock exchange. Private equity is a whole kind of subset of this, and when we talk about private equity, we're talking about M&A, acting on M&A transactions for private equity houses. And I'm sure you guys, no doubt, run seminars with PE lawyers, and I won't say any more about that. And then I think joint ventures is the last thing just to touch on. And so what's a joint venture? It's, you know, two parties coming together to run, own and operate a business. And that can be a kind of contractual joint venture. So you and your friends going to set up a lemonade business and agreeing to split the profits as a joint venture. And, you know, as is incorporating a massive company and owning it 50-50 is another type of joint venture.
Perfect. Thank you, Jack. And on the other side, what are the different types of lawyers in this practice area, Sophie?
Yeah, so we're definitely transactional lawyers in M&A, I would say. But I would also say that corporate lawyers tend to be like a bit of a handyman in the legal profession, kind of have to deal with and fix whatever it is that the clients are asking for. So although we're not litigators or regulatory lawyers, if a client comes to us and asks us to do something, we tend to be the middleman between us and, you know, the specialists or regulatory lawyers, and a lot of the time act as sort of translators between specialists and our clients. We tend to be the people who know the client best and what is going to be material for the client. So yes, although we're transactional lawyers, I think we wear many hats. And for me, that's definitely a positive. And one of the reasons I love this job is because you get to see so many different areas. And although you're not an expert in all of those, you still get to dip your toes into it.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Sophie. And my next question is quite related to that one. So, Katie, how specialist is it? Do you only do this sort of work?
Yeah, so as the other said, it is like a very generalist area, which is great in a way. It means it's never really boring. You rarely come across the same thing twice. And that does make it really enjoyable, as Sophie said. Obviously, there are kind of people in the team who might kind of more specialize in certain areas like public or VC work, where you could be helping a startup with their kind of series investments, kind of from an early stage. And some people are, more comfortable with those documents. They might have a bit more experience. So you will see pockets within M&A teams, but broadly speaking, we do wear a lot of hats, and we're kind of very transferable skills. Like, for example, in my previous firm, I also actually worked in Slaughters for a few years, but I actually was put in the competition team for 6 months to help out because the corporate team was a bit quiet. And it's amazing that the skills that you learn in corporate, you really can transfer them across to so many other teams and help them out as well when they need it. So it's a great kind of base to have.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. And the next question is what I'd like to pose to everyone, because I think we'll be interested to hear from everyone. What sort of clients do you work for, and in what sectors, which sort of we sort of covered? Starting with Dom, maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, broadly, you could bucket them into private equity houses. So your PE funds that everyone's heard of, famous names being like Blackstone or Macquarie or other funds of that nature. Then you have also corporate or more strategic clients who are owning and who are businesses that might be listed in the US or listed in the UK, that don't necessarily have private equity backing. And then within that, it's really per industry. It depends. At Jones Day, I'm relatively generalist, and so I've done everything from infrastructure to renewables to industrial companies or tech as well. So it kind of varies across that. Some people get a bit more specialist a bit quicker, so might only do a particular type of M&A, like between insurance companies or financial services. But yeah, it can touch in all sense. And it kind of really depends as you're looking at your careers. Doing some research on the firms you're applying to as to what kind of client base they have and who they service, because some firms can get relatively specialist. And I think all of us on this call are pretty general on in terms of the firms and the clients that they service.
Yeah. So Sophie, Katie, would you say you relate?
Yeah, definitely very similar situation for me at Skadden. If I compare it to where I trained at HSF, I mean, they might have restructured since I left, but I think when I left, there were 5 or 6 corporate teams all doing different type of M&A, infrastructure, tech, that kind of thing. Whereas at Skadden, we're just one general team. So yeah, we don't specialize in any particular sectors. But what I will say, which has been quite interesting for me over the past year, is I've started to focus more on the Nordic region, more out of luck than anything. But it's been really interesting, and trying to put a bit of time towards it to keep it going for the next few years.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm lucky to work across a lot of different sectors, which I think keeps it really interesting because you never get bored. So for a few months, you could be I was working on a fashion deal for a luxury brand, and then I was working on a banking deal. So very different sectors, but keeps things interesting. And it's great to learn about how different companies work. So if you are more commercially minded, it's great.
Perfect. Thank you both. And Jack, do you have anything to add perhaps as counsel? Is it any different or?
Well, look, I think you've got 4 law firms on the phone who, the clients will tend to be bigger institutions, be them private equity houses or large corporates. And then in terms of sectors, I agree with the guys. Most M&A lawyers, we specialize in buying and selling shares and writing commercial contracts. We don't particularly specialize per sector. So my career, I've done lots. I've done fashion, I've done sport, I've done insurance, I've done mining, I've done a lot of tech, I've done all sorts of things. And that's a really cool thing about the job, by the way, right? Because you get to learn lots and lots about the different companies that you're either buying or you're working for. You really get into it, and so you get to learn lots and lots about different sectors, and that's really cool.
Yeah, 100%. And Jack, sort of sticking with you, do different size firms approach this practice area differently, or is it pretty similar?
In terms of what type of work people work on, I think, look, historically, the English, magic circle firms and whatever historically would have worked for the corporates and would have tended to do corporate work, and be that, M&A transactions that they're looking to doing, or listing on the stock exchange, or being taken off the stock exchange by another acquirer. The sort of the big UK firms would typically have tended to do that. The influx of the US firms has been driven primarily by PE, and so more often than not, the US firms typically service PE clients. Although you've seen with a lot of the firms on the phone, you've seen them all now also working for big corporates. So Skadden's got a great corporate facing department as well as acting for PE. And then look, as you kind of go down into the silver circle and some of the more regional firms, the transactions are the same. When we're talking about M&A, we're talking about buying and selling companies and assets, and so the transactions are the same, but probably the size and the scale of the assets that are being transacted upon are probably smaller.
Great, thank you, Jack. And moving on to talk a bit about the day-to-day, I guess. Katie, is this the kind of work where the flow is steady, or would you say there's crazy peaks and troughs?
Yeah, it's definitely more peaks and troughs. So it depends on your deal cycle, what transactions you're working on and what stage they're at. Like if they're very busy, if it's near a signing or near a completion, then you can be, working around the clock. And then when that signs or completes, you can have quite a downtime. So you can be really, really quiet. And it's those weeks where your friends say, oh, you don't work because you're quiet for 1 week and you haven't slept in about 3 weeks. So, but yeah, so it's that kind of extreme sometimes. But then you can have a few months also where you get lucky and you just get kind of a more constant stream of work. So it's a bit easier to maintain. But yeah, definitely a bit more unpredictable with the workload.
Yeah. And Sophie, what might a typical day look like for you? And also, what is a trainee's role on a deal, for example?
Yeah, so I had just taking a random day from last week, Thursday, I think. I was just looking at my calendar earlier. I started the morning with an internal knowledge meeting where we discussed the latest public takeovers and any changes to the takeover rules. And we do that twice a month, which is just a really good opportunity to get everyone together and make sure everyone's on top of things that we should be clear on. And then I went back to my desk and had to mark up some reorganization documents we're working on. We are finalizing a pre-completion reorganization. So sometimes when you're selling, in particular, if you're selling assets from a company or you're doing a spin out, then you might have to move some things around within the group structure so that those things can easily be sold to the buyer, which is a very simple way of explaining it. But so I was finalizing those documents with my trainee, actually. So I was reviewing some updates that she had been doing. And then we sent those comments back to local counsel and had various back and forth with local counsel in Morocco. Then I had a welcome lunch with my trainee because she just started in September. We always have like a one-on-one welcome lunch and also a lunch at the end of their seat, just to see how they're finding it at the start, and then at the end to hear any feedback. And it's just a nice way to send the trainees off once they're finished. their seats. And then in the afternoon, I had a client call on this deal that's approaching completion. So I talk to the client almost daily because it's really ramping up and need to make sure that the work streams are running smoothly and we're closing out all the things that need to be closed out before completion. And then I also did some admin with my PA to line them some things up for an upcoming work trip, going to Sweden for some meetings. And that's pretty much it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for the detailed overview. I think that's really useful. And,
sorry, you also asked about my trainee.
What a trainee's like day, well, not the full day on, but I guess what their role be on a deal they work on, for example.
I think it depends a bit on the firm, but I would say definitely at Skadden, we're very, very keen to get our trainees involved in everything. And there isn't like buckets of work that's assigned to a trainee just because they're a trainee. We're very keen for them to put their hand up. And as long as they have a positive attitude to get involved, we involve them as much as possible. So they could literally be doing such a huge range from research. I asked my trainee to do some research today on a Jersey law point. We're obviously not Jersey lawyers, but I just needed to know get a steer on what we think the position might be in Jersey. They could do the first draft of some simple documents. They could be liaising with local counsel. It just, they can take on anything on the deal that any other associate can, just with a bit more hand holding. So I think it's very varied, but it's I think corporate is a great area for a trainee to sit in.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sophie. And Dom, how international is this area of law?
Yeah, I think I answered actually with someone got ahead of the game on the Q&A as well. But I think we're all at US firms, so a lot of our work largely is generated in the US, whether US companies or clients looking at deals in the UK or deals in Europe. Often London ends up being, what we're quite good at as Jones Day is being the kind of quarterback for global deals, because we can be the mouthpiece for other jurisdictions and often have a US translation because things don't work quite the same as they do throughout Europe or the world. But yeah, I deal with our local Jones Day offices in Paris, in Madrid, in Munich, in Singapore, and Australia, basically on a day-to-day basis, whether as part of like cross-border deals or just general ongoing work that we have, and a lot of connection with the US. Most of my calls at the moment, because of my deals are based in the US, are starting in the afternoon. So that feeds into all that we do. It's basically exclusively international. I can't remember the last time I did a deal that was like a UK company for a UK business. So yeah, it's always got some kind of element to it, which is great, because you end up being, I know a lot about, I've just finished an infrastructure deal, and I've sort of gained quite a lot of knowledge about ports and marinas in France and Spain, and so you kind of build up that knowledge base, which allows you to use that in your own jurisdiction and across the pond in the US, and also just like being in contact with your colleagues on a day-to-day basis across the world is very rewarding. They're very open to help, very collaborative, and it means that you can provide good service to your clients.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Dom. And moving on to talk a bit more about working in a firm and business development side. Jack, if I start with you, how do you go about getting business for the department?
I don't want to give the Weil sales pitch particularly. These are all fantastic law firms here, but one thing I think we probably do have that others don't: on a Thursday afternoon, there's a cake trolley. So I got passed an important message, which is, what cake do I want to pick from here? So I'm just being brought a bit of cake, which is lovely. The question was, what was it? How do we get business for the department? That is the question that all lawyers face, right? And it's really difficult because there's lots of fantastic law firms out there and lots of fantastic individual lawyers within those firms, like everybody on this kind of call. My view on it is the first and best thing you can do is to be a very good lawyer. And I think that is a way to keep the clients and the business that you already have. And that does in of itself throw off opportunities, because you are working across the table from other potential clients, other potential relationships. People move around quite a lot. So you may be working with one person from a particular private equity sponsor or corporate, and they go to a different private equity house, and lo and behold, you've got an opportunity there for a new client. I think that stuff aside, we write things, we all spend time writing things, putting it on our website, marketing pieces, updates to the takeover code or trends we're seeing in the market, and all of that stuff, again, helps start conversations with new clients. We go and see people to talk to them about those sort of things. Sometimes do events, we do conferences, we go for dinners. And look, this is a people business, right? That's what this business is. It's a people business, and so staying close to the people that you work with, and keeping together, and building on your network. I think if I was going to give myself, back in 2013, one piece of advice, it would be stay close to your network of people that you're interacting with, be it the kind of, the person in your law school class, or the banker on your deal, or your cohort of trainees, because people move all over the show, and staying close to them, at least for me, has thrown up some really interesting opportunities.
That's great, thank you, Jack. And continuing to talk a bit more about working in a firm, Sophie, how does your practice area engage with the rest of the firm? I know we kind of touched on that towards the beginning, but do you tend to work independently from other teams, or do you find yourself working across departments and other different practice areas?
Yeah, as a corporate lawyer, you definitely have to work across the entire firm. During the due diligence phase of a transaction, we will get all of our specialist team involved. So employment, IP, incentives, etc. They'll be really close to their areas of due diligence. And then in the negotiation phase, they'll also be commenting on the transaction documents. So it's really important to have a good relationship with your specialist, because you tend to ask them to look at things relatively quickly, and they can really help you out in certain situations. So yeah, we work closely with them, and then we also work very closely with our US teams. In particular, I work a lot with our Chicago and New York teams, because we have a lot of inbound work from US clients that are looking at European or UK targets. So as Dom says, we tend to be that in between go-to European hub. So there's a few different ways we work across the firm, and yeah, we're always interacting with lots of different people, which is a great one of the great things I love about this job is you definitely don't just get left on your own.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, Sophie. And Katie, this question is sort of related to the peaks and troughs questions earlier, but what's the work-life balance like in this area and in your firm?
Yeah, so in this area, in M&A, work-life balance is definitely not the highlight, but it's because it's client-facing, and even though you will be doing M&A day in, day out for your clients, unless they're like a PE fund or they're, kind of in the business of acquiring and selling businesses, this will be such a big deal for them. And, it'll be kind of monumental to their business often. So, they're going kind of hell for leather on the timetable, and you have to match that, and you always have to be available. But because it's a really interesting job, you usually don't mind it. And the rewards, they definitely outweigh any kind of sacrifices you have to make about midweek plans. In my current team, I'm really lucky that they really do prioritize, giving people time off when they need it. We really don't do weekend work unless absolutely necessary for client purposes. So that really helps you kind of preserve your energy. So you can work late during the week, but in the weekend that you really have them off, which I really appreciate. And I know from previous firms I worked at that wasn't always as important. But yeah, so I think when you're looking at firms, in particular, it's important to see how the partners in that team prioritize work-life balance to the extent they can within client demands.
Sounds great. Thank you, Katie. And I've noticed some questions from the audience, which lead us nicely onto the next section. So people have been asking about what kind of trends and how certain geopolitical factors are going to affect the area. So starting off with Sophie, how does the current economic climate, both UK and globally, affect the M&A market?
Yeah, the M&A market is definitely very sensitive to movements in the economic climate. I would say they almost go hand in hand. For instance, earlier this year, when Trump announced his tariffs, I basically had a deal go on pause the next day because it was a US conglomerate looking at a target in Denmark, and it just didn't make sense at that time. Unfortunately, hasn't come back yet, which is a shame. But it just really shows that it can actually affect the M&A market instantly, if not, overnight, basically. Equally, I've had many deals die or be deferred because of the lack of borrowing ability, because the interest rates are too high. I'm sure you guys have read all about that. It's been a very hot topic over the last few years. And I would say, as a general observation, ever since COVID, many players in the M&A market have just become a lot more risk averse, and we're seeing due diligence phases take a lot longer, and negotiations are more protracted, and therefore the deal timelines are a lot longer on the whole, which I think is quite a change from pre-COVID, where transactions would happen a lot quicker and with less due diligence. So that's kind of my overall observation, but happy for others to chip in as well.
Yeah, for my next question about AI, if anyone wants to chip in, I'm happy to hear from anyone else. It's okay. And yeah, so getting a bit more specific, I guess, with AI. So Jack, how do you think AI and technology in general will impact the legal profession, particularly in M&A, if not already?
It's going to wipe us out. I'm joking. Look, I think we don't know yet is the answer. I mean, there's been some level of automation and technology for as long as I've been doing this. And, I remember as a trainee joining at Slaughter and May, and they said, we've got this bit of tech, and, it's going to review all the data room and, do the diligence report, and, it's going to be able to brilliant and just cut down on all the training time and all that stuff. And, lo and behold, we're, 15 years later or whatever it is, and we still don't quite yet have that technology. So I think right now there hasn't been a massive impact, I would say, as of yet. But then I remember what my first kind of smartphone looked like, and it was terrible. And now look at what the technology can do. And so if AI can currently do what ChatGPT does, what's that going to look like in 15 years? I don't know. And so it's a big question, and a big, I think it's a big threat, but it's a big kind of opportunity for us as well. I think on M&A transactions, there will be some level of automation. Like ultimately, there will be some level of automation, instead of kind of more straightforward stuff, the reviewing the contracts, doing board minutes, all this, maybe preparing first drafts of the contracts is all stuff that will be able to be done by AI in the future. And so then what are we going to be paid for? And I think it comes down to judgment. I think that's ultimately what we're going to be paid for in the future. It's not going to be because we can look at the 1,000 documents. It's because we can make the right human calls on the things that matter for our clients in the future. I think that's what we're ultimately going to be paid for. But look, I think there's a massive change. I think there's potential for it to be a massive change. I mean, how do we charge people? We charge them by the hour. For the hour of a super intelligent, junior associate to go off and write a contract or review a document or whatever, we charge clients per the hour for that. And so if you have a bit of tech that can do that in a second, then what are we charging for? There's big challenges and questions for our industry about this stuff. But I don't think it's there yet, by the way. And I don't think it's as close as people say that it is either, but I might be proved wrong on that.
Yeah, and sort of sticking with you, because I think it's quite an interesting topic. Are there any specific concerns that arise with AI and technology, both in the legal profession and maybe specifically within M&A?
Concerns. I mean, look, there's all the sort of data security, data privacy concerns that people currently have with it, and that's to do with our ability to plug the tech into our system for client data to be uploaded to a Amazon web cloud that's then going to crash or could be hacked and all of this kind of stuff. And if you think about what we do, we sometimes do projects. If you're involved in a public company, it's highly price sensitive. Want to open yourself up to market manipulation, all this stuff. So there's definitely there's definitely risks around that, and people I think are quite nervous. And I think that also is going to be like a kind of inflection point, right? Because even if we did have the tech that worked, which right now I don't think we do. I mean, people can tell me Harvey AI works, but I've tried it and I don't think it does. There's still then a point about getting clients to believe that it works, because if the client says, well, but we're going to have humans check the computer anyway, and we charge them by the hour, that doesn't save them any money and doesn't save anyone any time. So there's going to need to be an adoption over a few years once it starts working, which is why I don't think it's there yet. I think it's going to take some time. But then other threats and questions about it. I mean, there's a big, huge societal question, right? And that's not particularly M&A or law firm related, right? It's white collar job related. If AI can spot cancer better than a doctor, do we need so many doctors coming out of medical school? I mean, it's huge, right? The potential for it is huge. And I'd be lying if I say I know how this is going to go. I don't.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
We're getting very deep there.
Sorry, was that a bit deep? Keep it light. I'm sorry.
No. We like personal examples and opinions for sure. And yeah, Dom, as I don't know if we covered everything that you maybe wanted to say, but what else does the future hold for the area of M&A, and how can aspiring listening prepare?
I think I actually, just a case in point, I put this question into Harvey, which we have access to at the firm, and it came up with a bloody good answer, which I won't go into, but it's quite long. But yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one of them, and I think unless you're trying to be at the cutting edge, then like that, I think will mean that you're slightly left behind. I mean, we're starting to get, it's been slower to come, but we're starting to get, questions from clients about saying, what kind of tech options have you got for this deal? And like, are there any ways that you can do things using your, subscriptions that you have to various tools? And, how much money is that going to save us, etc. So that is definitely coming into conversations. I think, we've touched upon market drivers, and I think, it's super interesting to know if I had the foresight to know what's going to be the next big thing. It was big in the early 2000s. It was IPOs and capital markets. So there were a lot of those kind of lawyers who got specialists in those. But then in the 2010s, people have kind of pivoted to be specialists in private equity. But then you say, oh, well, most people are saying, well, the halcyon days of private equity are slightly over. So, it's looking towards the next big thing. What that is going to be difficult to tell. I think what's definitely, clear is that, as everyone knows, that regulation is only getting stricter, as is the case in the evolution of law. In any case, once you start adding regulation, it's normally pretty hard to peel that back. And so there's stuff that is adjacent to the things that we do. For example, like the drive towards ESG kind of issues. You've got, general political moves towards slightly more protectionist policies within most countries. So, there's increased scrutiny on foreign direct investment. If you've got, a deal that involves an ultimate, capital coming from a country that a particular country might not want. We have particular instances of that in the UK, where we have foreign investors coming in that the government might want to just take a look at and see, is it right, or do we want this company to be buying, a jewel in the crown of British commerce? So that kind of thing is definitely going to continue driving things, and then I think it remains to be seen. I think it's an interesting time at the moment based on where everyone is, given debt loads for the UK economy, for the US, which is still managing to grow despite kind of treading a bit of a tightrope on its national debt as well. But I think, as Jack said, there's always going to be a role for M&A lawyers, which are really, as we've touched on in this talk so far, we actually end up being trusted advisors on more than just doing a deal. So more often than not, you're the person that your client will come to if it's got a variety of issues, and so you're basically helping them problem solve that, and it feeds into their business in all sorts of ways. So I think, despite advent of AI, definitely be on top of that and what's going on in the market. Short of following different deals, which we don't expect you to do as students or recent postgrads, because we all have lives, and as much as we keep up with the market that we're in, we all the last thing we probably want to be doing is reading about law on a Saturday morning when we've done it all week. But yeah, that kind of thing, and just being aware of what's going on around you, I think. Increasingly, I think the final point would be financial literacy. So I don't think, as M&A lawyers, we necessarily need to be, Excel whizzes or, understanding fully the models and the valuations that our clients are going at. But ultimately, I think that financial literacy, ultimately everything we do comes down to a cost for the client, or a price saving on a deal, or pricing that into how their returns are going to look. So the more you can be au fait with financials and accountancy terms, etc., and how that works in these deals, then that's going to put you in great stead.
Thanks a lot, Dom, for the detailed answer. And speaking of these changes, Katie, how would you say you remain up to date with the market and these sectors that are relevant to the practice?
Yes, so when you're practicing, there's probably two ways you can keep up to date. So one is through your firm, through regular training sessions that they hold. And in my firm, they have kind of industry group meetings. So it's not really about the law, but just about kind of like market practice in that area, and any kind of recent activity, let's say in oil and gas, which would be quite a big section of my team. And then on a personal level, and what you'd be kind of expected to do is to regularly inform yourself of, material changes in those sectors. And you can do this by a number of ways. But the easiest is to get kind of an automated notification from something like the Financial Times. So if you've a sector that you're interested in, for example, energy, you can kind of get updates where they filter out all of the other articles and they just send you the energy articles, so you can quickly see and even just read the headlines. And it's important to try and enjoy reading it, because if you feel like you're just doing it just because you feel like you have to, then you're not really going to soak it in, you're not going to enjoy it, you're not going to keep it up. But if you do take an interest in it and power through the first few weeks or months where you might not fully understand those articles, you actually would surprise yourself with how much then you can become an expert yourself in it. And when it comes up in conversation with a client, you actually know a lot more than you think. So that's kind of my tip on that.
Yeah, I agree, Katie. Thank you very much. And moving on to talk a bit about the skills and sort of getting into this practice area. Jack, what is the career path into this area? Is it a seat you do as a trainee and you qualify, or do you follow a well-worn or less traveled path through related areas to get there? Like, at what point do you know, that this practice area is your chosen specialty?
It's a great thing about going to a law firm. You get to try for some firms do 6. I don't know, however many different seats in different practice areas, and you get to try before you buy, and then you qualify into them. I mean, look, I think about 50% of our trainees are not lawyers, so I don't think you need to have done law in your undergrad or postgrad or whatever it is to ultimately become a lawyer and an M&A lawyer. So you don't need to read law. And then I think when you get to these kind of firms for the interviews, the vacation schemes, that kind of stuff, I think the people that do well in the interview are people that know their kind of know their CVs, and that can really answer why they want to work at a particular firm, why they want to be a lawyer, and then why they're a good person to work with, and what to want to be around. As I sort of said, it's a people business, and so demonstrating that you're someone that's collaborative and that wants to work hard and get on, I think all of that stuff is quite good advice. And then I think it's quite odd when trainees come to law firms and they're like, focused on doing one particular thing. Most of these big law firms have lots of departments, and so coming to it with an open mind and saying, hey, Weil's great at private equity, but it's also great at restructuring, and it's great at finance, and it's great at funds, and I want to try a few of those and see which one I pick. I think that's the way to kind of approach these training contracts. And then you come and do M&A and you get Stockholm syndrome and you never leave, and 10 years later you're still practicing it. I suppose that's what happens.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Just quickly, would like to go with some key skills. I know someone there's sending the question in the questions who asked about the key skills for M&A lawyers. So, Sophie, if I start with you, what are the key skills that you need to survive and thrive, I guess, in this area of law?
Yeah, I think the things that are the most important to keep in mind is just being really positive and open-minded, and someone who is genuinely happy to help. Because as a trainee, you're not going to be an expert in any of the areas, and people appreciate that. But if you have a good go at something, and you can tell when other people need a helping hand, or if you can preempt someone wanting something, or you can see a few steps ahead, that kind of mindset is really helpful. And then generally being organized and being good at project management skills. I know that probably sounds very high level to the students, but we rely heavily in corporate on checklists and workstream trackers, and that is a key thing for trainees to be on top of. And so I think for a trainee, it's really nailing those basic skills of being on top of what's going on. And then from there, you can really develop and become a key part of the team. And then I think, as Katie said, genuinely having an interest in the wider commercial world as to what's going on in M&A and the economy. Because if you're actually not interested in M&A or what's going on globally, then I'm not sure you'll find it very interesting day in and day out. And lastly, I would say being able to grasp concepts quickly, I think is something we assess trainees on. So again, it goes back to the fact that no one is going to expect you to be an expert in every single area, but if you are able to listen well and pick things up quickly, people really appreciate that, because there's a lot of things going on. And if you're able to say, oh yeah, I follow what you're saying, I'll follow your instructions and I'll get that done, people are really appreciative of that. And then of course, aside from that, actually being good at drafting skills and your analytical skills, but I think those other points are just as important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. And just conscious of time, Dom, I believe you have prepared us a quick, short case study on a recent deal that you might have done. And I know there's someone in the audience who was asking about for us to discuss some more recent transactions that you worked on. So I think that'll be quite useful for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what probably the best example of this for this group was I mentioned I did public and private work. So a public deal is probably the best example to take, given that hopefully you can all go away and research it afterwards. If interesting, you might not find it interesting, but hopefully you do. But parties involved, we had our client CareEat, who were a US based basically care home owner and operator out of California. They were looking at acquiring a UK listed PLC, which basically does the same thing as them, but in the UK. As many of you might know, in recent years, kind of valuations of public companies in the UK have been slightly depressed compared to global kind of peers and like market competitors. So are very attractive takeover targets at the moment. And especially REITs. So a REIT, for those who don't know, stands for Real Estate Investment Trust, and it's a tax efficient way for many of these companies to either own or operate real estate assets. And as I said, a lot of them are trading at discount to their actual asset value at the moment. Some of that being quite a heavy discount, which has made them quite appealing, particularly for these US buyers. So our client came in. It was interesting for us because it was the first deal that we'd done for them outside of the US. So they were, breaking the borders of their own country for the first time. The acquisition value was around £500 million. So it was also the largest deal that they'd done. And most of the deals they'd done previously were asset deals, so just pure property purchases in the US. So this was a proper M&A transaction, global, involving us as an M&A team in London, along with our real estate team as well. Since this deal has been, this was announced, and it was kind of one of the first few of them to happen. But in the past, over the past summer, there's been multiple other deals announced for UK listed REITs. So it was kind of at the forefront of that kind of trend, which is quite interesting as well to see how that's progressed. A couple of interesting bits. So touching on the kind of specialist aspect of what we do. So day to day, yes, we buy and sell companies, but also our job is to become basically an expert on each particular issue that comes up on a transaction. And that might entail working with our employment specialists on some tricky employment law aspects that we need to build into the deal. Or in this case, which was quite interesting, is that a fairly substantial but relatively minor in the context of the whole shareholder base. There was a sanctioned shareholder. So as you know, obviously, since the Ukraine war has started and sanctions regimes have been put in place, primarily targeting Russia and individuals who have been placed on specific sanctions lists in the US, the UK, and the EU. One of those individuals was basically the ultimate beneficial owner of a bunch of shares in our target company. But then obviously, given the regimes, you're prohibited, and we were prohibited from acquiring those shares, because that would then be having a transaction or dealing with shares with a sanctioned individual. So that required getting our regulatory colleagues involved in Washington in the US, in London here, and in Brussels in the EU, and coming up with a mechanism by which we could still acquire the rest of the company, but essentially give the consideration for that sanctioned individual shares to the clearinghouse that basically deals with the shareholdings for the public company. But they then go into a blocked account until such time as you either get a license from OFAC, which is the US sanction authority, or the sanctions are lifted. Should hopefully, as we all hope, that the war ends and kind of normal global kind of business resumes. But that's a kind of example of how something super niche and specialist, like a regulatory piece or sanctions piece, which I'm sure, speaking for, don't speak for everyone else here, but we're seeing creep into a lot of deals at the moment. If you've got a connection to Russia or other sanctioned jurisdictions, it becomes very tricky very quickly. So that was an interesting point to deal with, and that I think is going to come up in a lot of public deals in the next few years, because ultimately, as you know, and as some of you might do already, holding shares you might hold shares through a fund or through your savings account or something that ultimately shows up on the register as just a nominee account, but ultimately could be owned by a variety of different people. So it's super interesting to work through that. And then, alongside that, we also then completed the acquisition of the actual property manager after that deal. So that involved a bunch of additional things like employment considerations and using TUPE, which is kind of a method by which you can transfer employees. So alongside the whole kind of public takeover framework, we had super specialist areas in sanctions and regulatory. We had our employment colleagues helping us. and ultimately ended up with a successful transaction for our client, who's then looking to kind of build on this in the UK and potentially in Europe. And we've since got a lot of work out of them over here for them to build this portfolio. So kind of example of how cross-border, different jurisdictions and different kind of multidisciplinary work of what we do. But take a look at it. Yeah, it was Care Trust REIT acquiring Care REIT PLC. Confusingly similar names, but yeah, hopefully you can find it.
Sorry, can I just add to that? It's actually quite funny you mention it, because I've just worked on a takeover where we did the exact same issue with sanctioned shareholders, and we referenced that case in our submission to the court, the Care REIT case, and how they dealt with sanctioned shareholders. So it's interesting.
There you go, Katie. I was in the weeds. I was knee deep in that drafting for the scheme.
So were we. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's super interesting to see, and it translates to other people, other law firms, everything we do. So I think that's the great thing about M&A.
Yeah, I think it shows how interrelated the practice areas for sure. And thank you so much, Tom, for this detailed example. I know the audience definitely appreciated it. And before you go to the attendees, I'm just going to run a final poll about your key takeaway from today's session. So there should be a poll on your screen asking about what's your key takeaway from today. So would you say you have a better understanding of what solicitors in this area do? Do you have more knowledge of how to break into this area, or do you feel like you understand the key issues facing the practice area a lot better? Thank you very much. And while you are voting, I just want to say that before you all go, just another reminder to the attendees that we'll be sending out a link containing the recorded session. So please keep an eye out for that. A survey will also be popping up once this masterclass has ended. So please fill that in to let us know how you enjoyed today and what the topics you'd like us to see cover in the future. Also, remember to check out all our upcoming masterclasses on the events page on Law Careers Net. The link to which will be in the follow-up email as well. And a final reminder that applications for Law Careers Net Live are open until the 30th of October, so you still have just about a week to apply. And thank you to everyone that submitted their key takeaway. I think a majority of people said that they have a better understanding of what solicitors in this area do, which is great because that's the main aim of the session. And thank you very much once again to our panelists for this great session and to everyone attending. And we look forward to seeing you again next time.